Night. The sea is black as blacksmith's coal. Waves beat against the wooden sides, and in the distance, nothing but the abyss. Neither moon nor stars, only the sound of the wind and the rasping breath of 20 men, frozen in anticipation of dawn. They do not know where the shore is, but they continue to row. Why? Because 1,000 years ago, Vikings could see what was hidden from the ordinary eye. And it was this gift that allowed them to cross the North Atlantic, having neither compass nor maps. But what was their true secret? Luck, instinct, or something more? The answer lies deeper than it seems. Historians write that the first voyages of Scandinavians into the open sea began at the end of the 8th century, when their longships, drakars, first ventured beyond the Baltic. According to sources, they reached the shores of Britain, and later, Iceland, Greenland, and even America, long before Columbus.
Archaeological finds, such as the Lonzo Meadows site in Newfoundland, confirm they truly reached there. The longships which chroniclers mentioned were called drakars, from the word dragon. The bow of the vessel culminated in a carved image of a beast, as if ready to tear apart the storm. For the Vikings, this was not merely an ornament. It was a symbol of protection and strength. Imagine how in the gray northern fog the silhouette of such a beast appears, a wooden dragon carrying its silent warriors across the cold water. But how did these seafarers dare to embark on journeys across the ocean, where even birds lost their way? After all, they did not have a magnetic compass. It would only appear in Europe several centuries later. They relied on 3 secret tools: light, shadow, and memory. Each of them could become salvation or doom, and it was precisely they that transformed the boundless ocean into a readable map. The path to this art began long before departure. Young seafarers were taught to see not just the sea, but signs hidden in its breath. Just as an experienced hunter reads an animal's tracks, so too did a Viking read the sky and the water. Their navigation was not a science, it was a faith that nature speaks to man, if he knows how to listen. Archaeologists found in seafarers' burials stones with characteristic transparent inclusions, Icelandic spar. This was not an ornament, but an ancient tool capable of showing the way even under clouds. We will speak of it again later, but for now, imagine the northern sea at the dawn of the 9th century. The cold bites the skin, fingers cramp from salt, but in the chest, a fire blazes, the fire of those who go where no one has yet been. Because for Vikings, the sea is not a threat, it is a challenge, and only he who accepts it can call himself a true warrior. For, as the ancient sagas wrote, he who does not see the shore sees himself. And it is with this that the story of their great crossing begins. A journey where every dawn decides the fate of the entire crew. Before leaving their home fjord, a Viking had to learn to see the world not with their eyes, but with their senses. When the sea hid the horizon and the sky merged with the water, only those who trusted the signs survived. Every voyage began with observations of the sun and winds. Elders, gray-haired, with faces etched by salt, taught young warriors how to read the sky. They didn't just memorize the cardinal directions, they felt the sun's breath. Ancient sources mention that Vikings used a special tool, which historians would later call the sunstone. This was Icelandic spar, a calcite crystal found in several burials from the 9th to 10th centuries. Its power lay in its ability to refract sunbeams even through clouds. When the sun was hidden, a sailor would turn the crystal until he saw a double glow, one of which indicated the true position of the celestial body. This is how they found direction when the sky and sea became one gray mirror. Warriors called this moment the voice of light. Icelandic spar was their secret compass, a stone through which the sun spoke to man. Imagine a sailor standing on deck under a lashing rain, raising the transparent stone to the sky and seeing in it 2 ghostly glints, one false, the other true. The correct one had to be chosen, otherwise the ship would sail into an eternal storm. This second decided the lives of 20 people. Archaeologists from the University of Copenhagen indeed found a fragment of such a crystal at the bottom of the English Channel near the remains of a 16th century ship. A later one, but showing that the technology lived for centuries. Historians believe that Vikings knew about it long before the compass appeared in Europe. This fact strengthens the legend that their navigation was not a coincidence, but a system created based on generations of observations. But the sunstone was only one of 3 secrets. The second, shadow. In the morning, before leaving the harbor, the helmsman placed a wooden peg in the center of a board on which divisions were carved, a primitive sun board. As the sun rose, he marked the length and direction of the shadow to remember at what angle it was moving that day. On board the longship, he repeated this measurement and understood whether the ship was deviating from its course. This device was called the navigator's sundial, a simple but accurate way to orient oneself at sea without a map. The Viking's sensory world was extremely keen. He determined the distance to shore by the color of the water. The darker the shade, the deeper the sea. He knew that the smell of damp mud meant the proximity of an island, and flocks of seagulls circled only where there was land. For him, the sky was a page on which the gods wrote clues. This was not religion but experience. Survival demanded reading nature like a book. The sailor's diet was simple and designed for long months. Dried fish, oatcakes, sour beer that did not spoil during the journey. One person ate no more than half a kilogram of food per day. Water was replaced by mead. It killed microbes and provided strength. Every kilogram of excess weight could cost a life, so everything that was not vitally necessary was left on shore. Even weapons were limited, only a sword, shield, and knife. The rest for the battle of the spirit, not of steel. Before departure, the ship underwent a ritual of dedication to the sea. A torch was lit at the bow, and a drop of sacrificial bull's blood was thrown into the water, an ancient symbol of alliance with the ocean, not for superstition but for inner confidence. The sea would accept or reject. Every Viking understood that the ocean was not an enemy, but a test. He who fears has already perished. And now, dawn. The cold cuts the breath. It is quiet on board. The helmsman raises his hand, and the rowers slowly begin to guide the longship out of the fjord. Ahead, a path thousands of kilometers long, to Iceland, and then to a land where the sun sets beyond the ocean. They do not know where it is, but they believe they can find it, because they feel the direction not with instruments, but with their skin. Where we look for a map, they see the pattern of the wind. From the shore, only the cries of seagulls and a trail in the foam remain. Everything else, fog and the unknown. But it was precisely in this unknown that the greatness of the northern seafarers was born, for every stroke of the oar brought them not only closer to new land, but also to a mystery that no one could explain in words. When the longship's oars entered the icy water, the silence was broken by a prolonged creak of wood, a sound that made the sailors' spines shiver. This was the moment when land ceased to exist. From this moment, everything depended on the wind, the strength of their arms, and the knowledge of celestial signs. No shore was visible, but the helmsman knew. If the sun rose on the left, then the course was correct. If the rays reflected differently than in the morning, death was already near. Vikings called the chief navigator by the word stýrimaður, he who holds the course. He stood at the helm, gazing into the horizon, where a whitish haze concealed the sun. This person had to possess a special intuition, the ability to feel direction by the movement of the waves. Each wave had its own rhythm, and the stýrimaður knew how the Atlantic wind broke their pattern. Even with his eyes closed, he could tell where the ship was heading. This was a gift that could not be learned, only lived. The first trial came on the 3rd day. The North Atlantic Sea is unpredictable. Calm turned into boiling chaos in a matter of minutes. Chronicles tell that Viking ships could stay afloat in waves over 3 meters high. Their secret lay in the hull's construction. A longship had curved sides and flexible seams, greased with animal fat and tar. When other vessels broke, the Viking ship flexed with the wave. Archaeological excavations of longships in Oseberg and Gokstad confirmed this design was revolutionary for its time. They moved not only by day. At night they kept course by the stars, and then their third secret came into play: memory. The elder sailors knew the map of the starry sky by heart. They distinguished not only the North Star, but also dozens of other constellations. For them, the Little Dipper was not just a drawing, it was the way home. The sky served as their only map, and each dawn was a test of whether they had erred in their path. Historians note that Scandinavian sagas often mention night lights, stars by which seafarers determined latitude. Perhaps this was an early form of astronomical navigation, arising long before the appearance of the sextant. And if the sunstone showed direction by day, then at night memory preserved the course. An error of even a few degrees meant the ship would go nowhere, into an endless void. Meanwhile, life continued on deck. People warmed their hands by a coal box, ate cold fish, remained silent. Vikings rarely spoke on voyages. It was believed that a loud voice summoned a storm. Only the wind had the right to speak. Sometimes someone quietly hummed lines from the Elder Edda to keep their mind from fear. For fear was the main enemy. It made them see shore where there was none. By the evening of the fourth day, the sky was covered with low clouds, and the sun disappeared. Then the helmsman took the stone of light from his bag. He turned it in different directions and found a faint glow piercing the clouds. "The sun is there," he said, and the warriors continued to row. Archaeologists believe that this is exactly what the first use of the sunstone at sea looked like, not as magic, but as a precise instrument requiring experience and faith in one's own intuition. When night fell, the Stierdemather would dip his hand into the water. He felt its temperature and knew. If the water grew warmer, the current was leading south. If it grew colder, north. This is how he checked against the great current, the Gulf Stream, which carries warmth along the coasts of Norway. No one knew its name, but everyone felt its power. This was not science, but intuition transformed into navigation. Days passed. The rowers lost strength, their skin cracked from salt, but faith remained in their chests. They knew that when the seagulls reappeared, land was near. Hundreds of kilometers without a single landmark, only light, shadow, and memory. Yet they trusted these three forces more than themselves. While other peoples stood by the shore fearing storms, Vikings were already striding across the crests of waves. And each new storm brought them closer to the horizon, where for the first time in many centuries, man saw new lands emerging from the mist. The storm came suddenly. The air grew heavy, as if the ocean itself held its breath. Then the sky split, a rumble, as if iron was bending under the blows of gods. Waves rose higher than the mast, water poured over the side, and the longship shuddered like a living creature. Warriors bailed water with their helmets, clung to ropes, and the Stierdemather, standing at the helm, kept his gaze fixed on the horizon line, where lightning etched the path of fate. Vikings called such storms Seither of Winds, the breath of sea spirits. For them, a storm was not an enemy, but a test sent by the gods to examine a man's heart. Chronicles tell that in such moments, the helmsman sometimes whispered ancient formulas, not spells, but rhythmic lines that helped maintain breath and balance. This was not fear, but concentration, when man merges with the ship, and the ship with the wave. During a storm, navigation lost its meaning. The sun disappeared, the stars faded. Then Vikings oriented themselves by the direction of the foam on the wave crests and by the flight of petrels. Birds do not fly far from land, so land must be somewhere nearby. Sometimes the helmsman ordered a wooden pole to be thrown into the water, watching how the current carried it. Even this small gesture could bring them back on course if everything else failed. Archaeological studies show that the length of a standard longship reached 25 meters, and the crew consisted of 35 people. Everyone knew their place: rowers, helmsmen, mast guard. When the wind tore the sail, they acted as a single organism, lightning fast, without words. This was not discipline, but instinct, developed over centuries. One wrong step, and the ship would capsize. Therefore, Vikings trained even on land. They raised the mast as if in a storm, doused the deck with water to feel the slipperiness underfoot. A night in a storm was like death. The roar of the wind, the creak of wood, the shouts. Everything merged into one endless symphony of chaos. But somewhere between the waves, the styrmother noticed a light, a faint glow on the water. This was a phenomenon that modern oceanographers call bioluminescence, microscopic organisms flashing from the ship's movement. For Vikings, it was a sign. They believed that the gods sent them sea fires to show them the way. And indeed, at dawn, the clouds dispersed and a new horizon appeared through the haze. The sun rose astern, which meant they had drifted too far south. Then the helmsman took out the sunstone and turned it to the sky. A ray of light pierced through the crystal and fell on the deck. The angle of the glint told him the course needed to be changed to northwest. One turn of the rudder, and the entire flotilla turned, returning to the correct trajectory. This moment, the combination of intuition, observation, and instrument became a symbol of all northern navigation, a union of man and nature, where an error equals doom. When the storm finally subsided, the sea became quiet, like a mirror. The people were silent. The air was filled with the smell of tar and wet wood, and on their faces, weariness bordering on reverence. Everyone understood that they had survived not due to strength, but due to knowledge, that knowledge which was passed down not by books, but by breath, from the old helmsman to the young rower. It was in their blood, in their ability to read the world. Modern researchers confirm the journey from Norway to Iceland took about a week in favorable weather, but Vikings could take longer if storms knocked them off course. They covered a distance of about 1,000 kilometers, relying only on natural landmarks. No other people of that time made such open ocean crossings. This was not just a sea route, it was an act of will, where every meter of water was gained by courage and patience. When a rainbow appeared over the sea, the men knew the storm was behind them. But ahead remained a new, invisible danger: dense fog, capable of blurring the boundaries between sky and sea. And then, all three secrets, light, shadow, and memory, had to unite to lead them to where no one had yet stepped. For beyond the horizon, land awaited them, of which they had only heard in legends. On the 7th day of the voyage, the longship slowly advanced through dense fog. The air was thick with salt. The water seemed viscous, as if nature itself was holding the ship back. People spoke in whispers. Fog was considered a boundary between worlds, where one could hear the voices of deceased seafarers. But it was here that the fate of the entire voyage was decided. Aired by even one day, and the ship would drift into the Atlantic void, from which no one returned. Amidst this milky abyss, the helmsman once again took out his stone of light. The Icelandic spar did not glitter. It shone softly, like the breath of a star through clouds. The styrmother held it before his eyes, slowly rotating it until he caught a thin, almost invisible line of glint. "That way," he uttered, barely audibly, and everyone believed. Faith in direction replaced the compass, and certainty in the heart, maps. Vikings knew doubt in the path was more dangerous than any storm.
Historians note that such methods of light navigation required immense experience. A small deviation of 1 degree during the crossing from Norway to Greenland could increase the journey by hundreds of kilometers. But they were trained for years. Youths from childhood learned to observe the sky, the reflection of light in water, to listen to the sound of the surf. This was a school of living observation, not a written science, but navigation etched into the memory of generations. On the 8th day, the sun finally broke through the clouds. The sea became calm, almost like a mirror. Then the styrmother ordered the sail to be set. The white canvas with scarlet seams filled with wind, and the longship moved faster than ever. People began to speak again. Someone remembered the smell of earth, damp, warm, which they hadn't felt for a week. This smell was sacred to them. It meant that life had conquered the sea. Soon, birds appeared in the sky. First solitary ones, then whole flocks. They flew low, to the west. For an experienced sailor, this was the surest sign. Land was close. The warriors began to stand up, craning their necks, peering at the horizon. And suddenly one shouted. At the boundary of water and sky, as if carved from stone, a dark line appeared. Land. People jumped up, raised their shields, and shouted so loudly that even the wind quieted for a moment. They had found it. Iceland, then Greenland, and further on, that which would later be called Vinland, the land of grapevines. Archaeological excavations confirm the Lonzo Meadow settlement in Newfoundland dates back to about 1000 AD. This means that Vikings truly crossed the Atlantic Ocean 500 years before Columbus. They did this without a compass, without knowing longitudes and latitudes, guided only by nature and their own senses. Where a modern sailor relies on instruments, they relied on their eyes, hands, and heart. When the ship entered coastal waters, the men saw a greenish strip of land overgrown with grass and bushes. After 7 days at sea, this color seemed a miracle. They rushed into the water, feeling the sand under their feet. Firm, alive, real. The sea behind them seemed like a dream. And then the styrmother knelt, placed the sunstone on the ground, and said, "The light led us." This moment entered the memory of their people as proof that man can conquer the ocean if he knows how to listen to nature. Modern historians write that the Vikings' unerring orientation astonished even their enemies. Anglo-Saxon chronicles call them men who know the way without stars. Perhaps it was this sensation, to see where others are blind, that made them a myth. But behind the myth stood reality. Endless hours of observation, the memory of generations, and a burning desire to move forward, even when nothing was visible. By evening, as the sun touched the sea, the Vikings built a bonfire on the shore of the new land. The fire crackled, and in its reflections, the Icelandic spar crystal flashed with a final light. It was no longer needed. Now, before them stretched the land they had found themselves, without guides, without maps, only by memory and light. And somewhere deep in their souls, everyone understood. This was their victory. They proved that navigation is not an instrument, but the strength of the human spirit, capable of reading nature itself. The bonfire's flame trembled in the wind, reflecting in the bronze rivets of their helmets. The Vikings sat in silence, tired, salted, but alive. Before them lay new land, and behind them, the ocean they had managed to conquer without a compass, without maps, without the help of gods. Only light, shadow, and memory had guided them through the darkness, and now these three forces had become part of their legend. Archaeological finds at Lonzo Meadows proved they indeed set foot on the shores of North America, not for glory, but for the search for the limits of the possible. Their navigation became a bridge between instinct and science. Modern seafarers confirm the methods used by Vikings are surprisingly accurate, even by today's astronomical standards. In their simple stones and sunboards lies the birth of all maritime cartography. The sunstone, the sundial, and memory. 3 instruments, but behind each stood a man ready to trust his eyes when the world was hazy. This art was not passed down by books. It lived in their bodies, in their habits, in their breath. The sea was their teacher, and this lesson lasted for centuries. Когда дракар покидал берег, каждый знал. Возможно, вернуться не все. Но идти все равно нужно. Ведь их путь был не просто плаванием. Это было доказательство человеческой воли, способной превратить хаос океана в дорогу.
Теперь, спустя тысячелетия, мы смотрим на эти древние корабли в музеях, на камни света в витринах и задаем себе вопрос, смогли бы мы сегодня пересечь океан, полагаясь только на небо и собственное чутье? Что осталось в нас от тех, кто чувствовал мир без приборов? Викинги ушли, но их навигация осталась в каждом, кто ищет путь сквозь тьму. Ведь и сегодня, когда вокруг бесконечный шторм, только тот, кто помнит свет, находит берег.